Awesome. Before I start, I just want to say I've been incredibly humbled over the last couple of days by the presenters on the stage, but also the members in the crowd, and just want to say thank you all for taking the time to come and be here over the last 2 days, despite the horrible weather today. So I'm going to start off just grounding us all into talking about concussion. I'm going to start by saying concussion is a brain injury. That might be obvious to some, but I've sat across the table from countless numbers of people who say, my brain's fine, I'm just concussed. And I have to explain to them what a concussion actually is. And so what concussion means is the Latin root of the word means to shake violently, right? So any exposure that causes your brain to shake around violently inside your skull can technically be considered a concussion. And so rather than thinking of this as a simple black and white issue, I think about it as a spectrum of injury. And so I'm just going to go over that spectrum now, just so we can all kind of be on the same page with what we're talking about. So on one end of the spectrum is what people might call repetitive head impacts. So an easy example of this would be heading in soccer. You go up, you head the ball, you come down, you feel fine, nothing's changed. But if you do that over and over again, it might lead to something that might become clinically meaningful over time. So a good example of this, if we want to use maybe something we might be more familiar with, would be like a stress fracture in a bone. So if you're a runner and you don't have good running form, over time you might develop a stress fracture in your tibia. And no single step caused that fracture, but it was the accumulation of all these steps over time without doing something about it that led to something that then we need to go on and intervene with. What most people think of as concussion is what I think of as clinical concussion. So this is where there's been some sort of an event where the brain's jostled around inside the skull, and this has led to someone either losing consciousness, having amnesia, reporting a headache, throwing up, having difficulty sleeping, and on it goes. And so in the domain of clinical concussion, we've got symptomatic concussion, which is what I just described. You've got these burdens or these symptoms or these signs that the person's experiencing and reporting. Then about 50% of people will transition to asymptomatic concussion within the first 2 or 3 weeks of their injury, which means their symptoms have kind of eased away, but their brain might still be vulnerable. Just like if you've rolled your ankle, it still might be susceptible to a further roll if you haven't given it enough time to bounce back. And another 50% of people who could have persistent symptoms up to a year after a concussion. And then on the far end of the spectrum, we have the potential long-term consequences of concussion, which might be cognitive decline or neurodegenerative conditions. We can also quickly think of the spectrum based on time. So hours, days, or weeks after the injury, weeks or months after the injury, or years and decades. And so I think this is a nice visual that showcases this is what most of us think concussion is. There's a single blow, and it takes us from having a happy, healthy brain to a not-so-happy brain. But what we're starting to think is that this is a much more complicated issue. Our body and our brain is resilient, and so we might be able to be exposed to repetitive head impacts in sports or in other aspects of life over time, and that might push us towards a tipping point where now it's the next impact actually pushes us into a experience where now, again, we might need some clinical intervention to help us out. And so I'm going to talk tonight about the work we're doing in the sport domain and specifically with rugby. And in Gil's talk, if you were here, he talked about how a lot of attention has been put on sport and it's been disproportionate to other areas, and that is absolutely true. But the reasons why there's been a lot of focus on sport so far is it's 1/5 of all of these injuries will happen through physical activity or participation in organized sport. We've got a disproportionately high rate of these injuries that happen in young people under 30 years old, and particularly in children. And generally, people who have had a concussion during sport, they want to get back to the activity that caused the injury in the first place. So it's pretty important to figure out what those risks might be if they're going back too soon, or how that might lead to a recurrent injury. And then lastly, why sport? Because when you see these injuries happen in a World Cup final or in the Super Bowl, it creates a lot of profile, and it brings a lot of eyes and attention to it, and therefore that's often where the research funding chases, is where the profile is. And at least it gives us a starting point to try and ask and answer questions in 1/5 of these patients, and then take those discoveries and move on and work with the other 80%. When we look at the New Zealand data, a lot of people will say, well, rugby is obviously the main cause of concussions. But when we look at the data, cycling is far and away the #1 cause of concussions, and equestrian's #2, and then we get into rugby codes after that. So I think it's just a good place to kind of orient ourselves. So we said, okay, we want to try and study this. Particularly, we want to work with rugby because we went and spoke to people in the community, and they said, we want to know about what head knocks in rugby are doing to our young people. And so we said, cool, we've got a fancy MRI machine. We're going to bring some rugby players in. We're going to scan the brains at the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and the end of the season. And we're also going to give every single player these fancy mouth guards that track every little head knock that their head takes over the course of the season, even if it doesn't lead to a clinically diagnosed concussion. So even if it's something as small as this, it's going to get recorded. And so we can try to figure out these individual differences. So if you've got a player who kind of rides the bench and only gets 5 minutes of game time every couple games versus a heavy hitter who plays every minute of every game and is involved in a lot of collision, we want to be able to see, are there differences on the imaging based on that information? And so we know if you follow a big enough group of people over time, playing a collision sport like rugby, concussions are going to happen. It's just a numbers game. And so what we've done is we said, okay, well, we'll invite those players to come back, and we'll scan them a few more times within the first week of their injury, 2 to 3 weeks post-injury, and then at about 8 to 12 weeks. So we can see what they look like before, what they look like as soon as possible after, and then follow them as they recover and see if their symptoms improve, how do their images change, or if their symptoms don't improve, what do we see on the images? And so this is great, but all of this lives on paper unless you actually go out and engage with the right people in the community, find the right stakeholders, and get it over the line. And so now for this chunk of the talk, I'm going to hand over to my good friend here, and he's going to tell you about how we've actually approached the community engagement piece to this study. Oh, sorry, actually, everyone got fancy scans. These are the best scans any kid has got on their brains in the world. Is happening right here in Gisborne. Now I'm going to hand over.
Kia ora, kia ora. Before I start, I'm just going to apologise in advance. We may run over time, so apologies for break. Before I get started, whenever I like to present to an audience, I try and get a bit of crowd interaction. I just want to lift a bit of energy in the crowd, so we're going to do a little task. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word, then I'm going to give you a hand gesture, and I'm going to ask you all to say the word. Okay, we'll have a go. Tuterangi. 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 Tāne. Tāne. We're going to say those 2 words together now. Tuterangi tāne. Tuterangi tāne. Kia ora tātou. My name is Tuterangi Nepe-Apatu. I've been privileged enough to join the Mātai team as a research assistant and to support our research in the concussion study that we're doing within the community. My job today is to try and give you an oversight in 2 minutes on how we were able to engage our community within this program. In particular, our Tuterangi Tāne rugby teams or programs, our Gisborne Boys First 15 and Second 15 rugby teams. To give you an overview on how that was achieved, our journey started in January and finished in August. We were trained 3 days a week, and we played a total of 13 games throughout our season. These games included a flight and 2-night overstay to Wellington.
You're good, keep going.
8-hour bus trip to Auckland, a 7-hour one-way journey to Plymouth, and our biggest achievement was an 8-hour one-way journey to Napier via Victoria. All this was because of what happened with cycling Gabriel. Here we go, back in action. Our season would usually be about 17 to 18 games long. However, due to what happened throughout the season, we were only able to complete 13 of these games. If you don't know much about the rugby program history, we have a strong history of being a community rugby team. So we're not just only a school rugby team, we actually play for the community. If If you come to our home games, if you go to our away games, we are very well supported. And just acknowledging what the rangatahi said before me is, it's about creating opportunities for our kids, our whānau, to be able to launch or platform themselves towards the world stage. And we were very successful in having 3 of our former students participate at the recent Rugby World Cup. Jamison Gibson Park, who represented Ireland, Toa Halafihi, who represented Italy, and Paula Latu, who represented Tonga. One of our recent interns, unfortunately, had to turn it down because they've been training with the New Zealand under-19 rugby team and is hopefully going to make the New Zealand under-20s rugby team for next year's tournament. So obviously there's a theme here, tūranga tāne. All right, so phrase, and then the phrase goes, when I say tūranga, you say tāne, tūranga, tūranga. When I say tūranga, you say tāne, tūranga, tūranga. There's always a method to my madness. So in order for this program to be very successful, obviously we have to build relationships, firstly with the players, not only the players, but also their parents or their whānau. Anyone who has teenage children within this room, we know we all like to make the decision for our children until they leave home. So it's really essential that we also build that relationship with the parents as well. But not only the players and the parents or the whānau, we also need to build the relationships with the schools. So that includes the school principal, the school teachers, the coaches, the managers. So it's a whole collective of building relationships within that community for us to be successful. And that's how we did it pretty much. We just showed them we cared, and it's the way we communicated with everyone. We were able to create that connection for our program to be successful. So similar to the interaction that I just done with you, I could see we needed a little bit of energy from you, so I cared for you. And by doing that, hopefully my communication was received and you were able to participate. And in return, I was able to build a relationship and a connection with the audience. Did I do a good job? And then, of course, with everything around building relationships, then you can build trust. So you're getting the trust from everybody. You build the rapport, you build the respect, and ultimately, you get a bond. To give you a quick overview on how we were successful in our season, as Josh mentioned, concussions do happen. It is a physical sport. Throughout the season, we had a few players that received concussions. Towards the end of our season, we had 2 key players in our team who got concussions. We had to put in our protocols. And unfortunately, they had to miss the following 2 games, which happened to be the 2 biggest games of our season. It didn't really go down well with the school, but without the trust and the bond that we created with the coaches, they were able to see that the short-term loss of our players not being able to play was a long-term gain for their health and in the future. Fast forward the next game, we lost another player who was a key to our team as well. We had discussions with the parents and they didn't want him to stand down. So we were able to put in some medical processes in place that he passed and he was able to continue to play. None of that would have happened without any of the rapport that was built between our team and the school. And then there's a continued pattern. Our second to last game, we lost another 2 players. Unfortunately, those 2 players weren't able to finish our season off, but the 3 that we lost previously were able to come back and finish our season with a win. So a big testament to the guy behind me. He's done a lot of work behind the scenes. This is the 2nd season we've had with this team. My 1st season, but we put in previously, none of this would be able to the success that it is today. Just to wrap up my kōrero, in terms of my personal experiences, I wanted to give you a true, authentic, Gizzy way of presenting today. I almost stood up here, my number 1s, but I decided to wear one of our t-shirts and promote our sponsors, because without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to do anything that we do with these players. So I've been told I've been the first person on here with a moon boot. I stopped short of wearing my red band, so. In terms, just what the previous rangatahi have said, it's just about creating pathways for our people to be able to get onto the world stage. They're always going to face challenges, but as long as you have those relationships and people that you have trust to help support you to wherever you want to go, I think is the key to success. Sorry, Bree. Kia ora.
Oh, okay, I'm going to lightning round finish this up because I want to show how these partnerships are allowing us to do real-world leading research. So I just want to tease some exciting results, and then we'll wrap it up. So when we try to solve this problem of understanding concussions, we've got 3 pillars to the ecosystem: recognize the injury better, understand recovery better, and then make sure that when people go back, they're actually recovered. Okay, so that's the goal, is to tick those 3 things off. The last thing I want to touch on here is now looking, I've shifted the scale over to what we've kind of seen in a very tip of the iceberg analysis, looking at repetitive head impact. So in players who haven't been concussed but have been exposed to all these knocks over the course of the year. And compared to a group of young, fit boys who don't play rugby, we have seen that there have been these orange blobs in these photos here are showing areas of the brain that have changed over the course of the season in the rugby players, different than the controls. Okay, this doesn't tell us necessarily how much it changed, it just shows these are areas where change has happened. And we see that there is a trend over the season, right? What we don't know here is our controls were only collected at one time point, and we're dealing with young people. So a good chunk of this could be growth. So we're in the process of trying to figure that out. But what we've seen here is something might be happening that we need to do something about. And so we're already not waiting to dig deeper into that. We're already thinking 2 chess moves ahead and saying, okay, we've asked the question, how much change do we see over the season? And one of our first analysis says we do see some, even if they haven't had a diagnosed concussion. And this might have identified a problem, but I'm a solutions-focused guy. So we're already bringing in the funding that should be signed off fairly soon. That will now allow us to ask the question, how much time off is needed for these changes to bounce back? Right? Because if they bounce back within a week or 2 of the season ending, probably not a big deal. Maybe if it takes 8 weeks, well, we know some of these players are only getting 3 or 4 weeks off a year. Maybe we need to work with New Zealand Rugby and World Rugby and say, hey, if we just give 4 to 8 weeks a year, no contact, any of these changes we see will bounce back. And we're not saying don't play, but we're saying, hey, let's just do this in a more informed way, an evidence-based way. And so the last thing I'm going to touch on before I get dragged off the stage is when most people want to talk about concussion in sport, they only want to talk about the risks. And the reality is participating in sport is associated with huge benefits, social benefits, physical benefits, and the list goes on. And so what we need to do is, as scientists, we need to focus on maximizing the benefits by understanding or reducing the risks wherever we can. And through doing so, we'll get those trickle-down effects and make sure that the good parts of the sports are maximized. If anyone here has ever been involved with rugby, you know it creates an amazing sense of community. And there are people out there saying, just don't play because of some of the stuff I showed you on the last slide. And the reality is we don't really know. And so we're in the process of trying to figure that out and staying solutions-focused rather than just pointing a finger at the problem. Last thing will be the thing that gets me most excited about being involved with this community and this research is the papers and all the stuff is cool, but it's the peripheral benefits that are the real exciting things. So Toots mentioned one of the players who was in the first round of the study went on to get a Mātai scholarship that helped him go to university. In his interview, he said, basically hanging out with me and learning about science inspired him to want to go on and become a surgeon. And just through those interactions on the sideline, that led to him getting a scholarship, and he got an internship that he had to turn down because now he's got a pro rugby contract, right? So it's those types of things where the research is great, but it's all the things that happen around the research going on are just as valuable. And with that, I will finally run off the stage. This is the team. We all do this together. These are the funders and everyone else who couldn't fit on the last slide. Thank you. Sorry for going over time.